The city of Atlanta woke slowly that Saturday morning, the streets just beginning to stir with life as the sun rose above the horizon. The skyline shimmered in shades of orange and gold, tall glass towers reflecting the light like giant mirrors. Angela Brooks watched the sight from her apartment balcony as she sipped her morning coffee. For a long time, she simply stood there in quiet reflection, letting the weight of her journey wash over her. Today was no ordinary day. Today, she had finally decided to take a step she had once thought impossible. She was going to buy herself the kind of car she had only ever admired from afar. For years, she had walked past luxury showrooms and glanced longingly at the vehicles parked behind glass walls. Sleek sedans that seemed to glide effortlessly, powerful SUVs that towered with quiet strength, and sports cars whose engines roared like thunder. To others, they might have just been machines. But to Angela, they represented something much greater, proof that she had made it, that all her sacrifices, all her sleepless nights, all her silent tears had not been in vain. Angela's life had not been easy. Born on the south side of Chicago, she was the eldest of 3 siblings. Her mother had worked as a nurse's aide, often pulling double shifts just to keep food on the table, while her father spent long, grueling days at a steel factory. Money was always tight, and luxuries were a foreign concept. Angela remembered the winters most vividly, cold nights when the furnace would break down, and her family had to huddle under blankets to keep warm. She remembered going to school with second-hand clothes and shoes that pinched her feet, yet still walking tall because she refused to let shame consume her. From an early age, Angela knew she wanted more, not out of greed, but out of necessity. She wanted to build a life where her family would never have to wonder where the next meal was coming from or if the rent could be paid on time. She threw herself into education, studying long after her classmates had gone to bed. She devoured books, wrote endless notes, and refused to accept failure as an option. By the time she graduated high school, her grades had earned her a scholarship, her ticket out of the cycle of struggle. College was no easier. Angela worked part-time jobs to cover what her scholarship didn't. She scrubbed dorm hallways, served food in the cafeteria, and even babysat for professors' children. Each paycheck went to bills, textbooks, and sometimes a little extra to send home to her mother. While her peers spent weekends at parties, Angela spent hers at the library, preparing for exams, determined to prove herself. And she did. She graduated at the top of her class in business administration. But even with her degree, success did not come overnight. Angela entered the corporate world bright-eyed and ready to prove herself, only to be met with closed doors and dismissive glances. Too often, she walked into offices where her skin color and gender caused people to underestimate her before she had even spoken. She was told she didn't fit the image of the companies she applied to, or that she should aim a little lower. Each rejection stung, but she refused to be broken. Instead, she learned. She studied the real estate market, took risks, and poured her energy into building something of her own. Years passed, and brick by brick, Angela constructed a foundation that could not be shaken. She invested in small properties, sometimes living in less than ideal conditions herself so she could rent out nicer spaces to tenants. She reinvested every dollar she earned, expanding her portfolio little by little. There were setbacks. Bad tenants, unexpected repairs, economic downturns. But through it all, Angela persevered. And slowly, her determination began to bear fruit. By her mid-30s, she was not only financially secure but also well-respected in her field. Now, at 38, Angela had something she had never allowed herself before: the freedom to dream without fear. She had built a life of stability and success, and today, she was finally going to celebrate that journey. She wasn't looking for validation or approval. She had long since stopped seeking those things from others. No, this purchase was for her and her alone, a symbol of triumph. She glanced at the clock on her wall. 9:15 a.m. The showroom she had chosen opened at 10, and she wanted to be among the first customers there. She finished her coffee, set the mug aside, and went to her bedroom to get dressed. Angela had always believed in presenting herself with quiet dignity. Today, she wore a crisp white blouse, neatly pressed black slacks, and modest black heels. She tied her hair back in a bun and added a touch of makeup, not to impress anyone, but because she enjoyed the ritual of caring for herself. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the girl who once sat shivering in a cold apartment, wondering if her family would ever escape poverty. She saw a woman who had fought every battle life had thrown at her and emerged stronger. Angela grabbed her purse, picked up the keys to her practical but aging sedan, and stepped outside. The summer air was already warm, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and the distant hum of traffic. She slipped behind the wheel of her car, the familiar rattle of the engine reminding her once more why today mattered. As she merged into the flow of traffic, her mind wandered. She imagined what it would feel like to drive home in a brand-new luxury SUV, its engine smooth, its leather seats wrapping her in comfort. She imagined her younger self seeing her now, the proof that perseverance paid off. Angela smiled to herself as she drove, her heart swelling with anticipation. She didn't know exactly what awaited her at the showroom, but she carried no fear, no hesitation. After all, she had overcome far greater challenges than buying a car. And so, as the glass towers of downtown Atlanta gleamed in the distance, Angela Brooks pressed forward, unaware that this day, meant to be one of joy, would also test her resilience in ways she had not expected. The drive into the heart of Atlanta felt almost ceremonial for Angela. The traffic lights changed rhythmically, pedestrians moved with their morning energy, and coffee shops bustled with life. But Angela's mind was fixed on her destination, the Sterling Motors luxury showroom, one of the most prestigious in the city. It was a building she had passed countless times before, always as an outsider, a dreamer pressing her nose against the glass with her gaze, never stepping inside. Today, however, the narrative was different. She was no longer the woman peering in. She was a woman walking in with the power to choose. The Sterling Motors building loomed ahead like a temple of modern success. Glass walls stretched skyward, reflecting the morning sun, while polished chrome trim made the structure glimmer like something futuristic. Expensive cars sat in neat rows outside the entrance, each one shining as though it had just rolled off a magazine cover. Angela pulled her modest sedan into the visitors' parking area, her car looking small and tired in comparison to the exotic machines surrounding it. But Angela didn't feel small. She had earned her right to stand among them. She stepped out of her car, smoothing her blouse as she closed the door. For a moment, she let her eyes roam over the vehicles parked out front. A pearl-white Bentley SUV with black rims gleamed in the sun. A sleek, midnight blue Porsche convertible practically whispered of speed and extravagance. And beside them sat a red Ferrari, low and sharp, like a predator waiting to pounce. Angela had no intention of buying a sports car. She wanted something practical but refined. But still, she allowed herself a moment of admiration. Walking toward the entrance, she noticed how spotless everything was. The pavement was so clean it reflected the sunlight, the glass so polished that her reflection looked like a painting. Automatic doors slid open as she approached, and she stepped inside, instantly greeted by a rush of cool, air-conditioned air. The showroom was vast and cathedral-like, its high ceilings lined with modern chandeliers that spilled warm light over the glossy tiles below. The scent of new leather and wax polish hung in the air, mingling with faint notes of expensive cologne. Angela paused briefly at the threshold, taking it all in. She wanted to savor this moment. Every detail seemed to reinforce the significance of where she stood. This wasn't just a showroom. It was a stage where wealth, success, and prestige were on display. And she was finally ready to play her part. Rows of cars stretched across the floor, each displayed with almost reverent precision. SUVs with bold grilles and sleek designs. Sedans that radiated quiet sophistication. Convertibles that hinted at freedom and indulgence. Each had its price tag carefully tucked beside it, though the numbers were more for status than practicality. If you needed to ask, you likely couldn't afford it. Angela moved slowly between them, her heels clicking softly against the tile. She ran her hand lightly along the polished frame of a black Range Rover, admiring the craftsmanship, the way the paint seemed to absorb light and then give it back with a quiet shimmer. Her heart beat faster. This was the world she had once thought belonged only to others. And yet here she was, a part of it. But even in her quiet awe, Angela couldn't ignore a shift in atmosphere as she walked further inside. Conversations between staff members hushed ever so slightly. A receptionist behind the glass desk glanced up and then quickly looked back down. Two sales associates standing near a Mercedes exchanged a look, their smiles faltering for the briefest of moments before they resumed their discussion. It wasn't overt, not yet, but Angela had been through enough in life to recognize when she was being silently measured. She straightened her back and walked on, unwilling to let it rattle her. She had grown accustomed to those subtle looks, the kind that asked, "Does she belong here?" She had seen them in boardrooms, in restaurants, in banks. And every time, she had answered with her resilience. Angela stopped in front of a deep green Lexus SUV, its interior glowing softly under the showroom lights. She imagined herself driving it through the city, the hum of the engine steady beneath her, the comfort of its seats reminding her of how far she had come. She was still studying the details when a voice broke through the silence. "Can I help you with something?" Angela turned to see a man approaching. He was tall, with neatly combed blonde hair and a suit that looked as though it had been tailored to perfection. His name tag glinted, Michael Sanders, showroom manager. His expression carried the kind of polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Angela returned the smile, her voice calm and assured. "Yes, I'm interested in purchasing a new vehicle. I'd like to look at some of your SUVs, preferably with luxury features." Michael's smile stiffened. For a fleeting second, his eyes flicked from her face to her attire, then to the purse she carried. Angela noticed the look. It was quick, but it was enough. He wasn't just evaluating her as a customer. He was making assumptions. "Well," he said, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve, "these vehicles are quite high-end. Are you sure you're in the right section? We also have certified pre-owned cars that might be a little more accessible." The words hung in the air like a challenge, sharp and dismissive. Angela felt the sting, though her expression remained composed. Inside, a wave of disappointment rose. This was supposed to be a day of triumph, of joy. Yet here it was again, that same undertone of doubt, that same insinuation that she didn't belong. Angela looked him squarely in the eye, her voice steady. "I'm certain I'm in the right section. Now, if you'd like to show me the features of this SUV, we can start there." For a moment, Michael seemed caught off guard. His smile faltered, replaced by something colder. But before he could respond, Angela noticed another detail. Other customers nearby had begun to glance in their direction. A woman in a silk dress raised her brows in curiosity, while a man in a suit looked away awkwardly. They had heard enough to sense the tension. Angela held her ground. She would not let this man reduce her to stereotypes or assumptions. Not today. Angela had dealt with people like Michael before. Men who wore politeness like a thin mask, stretched over layers of arrogance and judgment. She could already feel the weight of what was about to come, like a storm cloud gathering above a clear sky. Michael circled around the SUV with an air of superiority, his leather shoes clicking sharply against the pristine tile. "This particular model," he said in a clipped tone, "starts at around 90,000. Fully loaded, you're looking at well into 6 figures. Of course, that includes features such as leather upholstery, panoramic sunroof, heated and ventilated seating, top-of-the-line navigation." His voice trailed as he studied Angela again, his eyes narrowing slightly. It wasn't what he said that carried the insult, it was how he said it. Each word came out as though it were designed to remind her of the cost, as if assuming she would recoil at the number, as if daring her to admit she couldn't afford it. Angela remained calm. She had weathered far greater storms than a smug showroom manager. "I see," she replied evenly. "I'd like to test drive it if possible." Michael gave a short laugh, soft but laced with disbelief. "Of course," he said, his smile tightening again. "Though we usually require some proof of serious interest before offering a test drive on a vehicle of this class." Angela raised a brow. "Proof of serious interest?" "Well," Michael continued, "a pre-approval letter, financial statements, or something of that nature. These cars attract A lot of casual browsers. His eyes flicked to her blouse, her shoes, then back to her face, and the message was clear. He wasn't talking about casual browsers in general. He was talking about her. Angela's jaw tightened, though outwardly she gave no sign of offense. She knew this game. It wasn't about policy. Plenty of people test-drove cars here without flashing their bank statements. This was about him trying to remind her of a place he thought she should know. Beneath him, other sales associates nearby had begun stealing glances, their smiles faltering as the tension thickened. A young trainee holding a brochure looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Customers shifted uneasily, pretending to study vehicles while clearly listening in. Angela took a breath. I assure you, Mr. Sanders, I am not a casual browser. I'm here to purchase a vehicle. If you'd like to keep this conversation professional, I'd appreciate it. The use of his name made Michael's smile vanish entirely. His mask of politeness slipped, revealing the irritation underneath. Look, he said, his voice sharper now. These cars aren't cheap. We deal with a certain clientele here. It's not about professionalism. It's about being realistic. You understand what I mean, right? The insinuation cut through the air like a knife. It was no longer subtle. It was direct, humiliating, and delivered with the smug confidence of someone who thought there would be no consequence. Angela's chest tightened, not with shame, but with the old, familiar ache of frustration. She had spent her life building, working, proving, and still, here she was, being reduced to someone who had to prove her worth before even sitting behind the wheel of a car she had every right to buy. For a long second, she didn't move. Then she took a deliberate step closer to the SUV, her voice calm but firm. You don't know me, Mr. Sanders. You don't know what I can afford or what I've worked for. I came here today with excitement, with pride, and you've chosen to humiliate me instead. Michael shifted, clearly caught off guard by the steadiness of her response. But his pride wouldn't let him retreat. He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. I'm just doing my job. Maybe next time you'll try somewhere more suited. That was the moment the mask of politeness shattered completely. His words were laced with open dismissal, his tone dripping with condescension. He wasn't just doubting her financial ability. He was questioning her right to exist in that showroom, in that space reserved, in his mind, for others. A hush fell across the room. The receptionist behind the desk pretended to type, but her eyes were wide, locked on the confrontation. A man browsing near the Porsche glanced over and then quickly turned away. His lips pressed tightly together. The air was thick with discomfort, with secondhand shame for what they were witnessing. But Angela refused to carry that shame. She let his words linger for a moment, then straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin slightly. You've made yourself very clear, she said quietly. And I'll make myself clear in return. I won't forget this. Michael smirked faintly, clearly believing he had won. To him, she was just another dreamer who had been reminded of her place. He didn't see the storm gathering behind Angela's calm eyes. He didn't recognize that the foundation of his arrogance was already beginning to crack. Angela turned away, her heels clicking once again against the polished tiles, her heart heavy but her pride intact. She didn't look back at Michael, but she could feel his smirk lingering, could almost hear the silent chuckle in his throat. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this humiliation would not go unanswered. The world has a way of pulling masks away, of humbling the proud, of revealing truth at the most unexpected moments. And for Michael Sanders, that moment was approaching faster than he could imagine. Angela's footsteps echoed across the gleaming showroom floor as she walked toward the exit, her composure intact but her heart pounding. Each step felt like it carried the weight of centuries. Echoes of every moment Black women had been underestimated, dismissed, and told they didn't belong. She wasn't just walking away from a car. She was walking through the thick fog of prejudice that still lingered in places like this. But while she moved toward the glass doors, the silence she left behind began to stir. The showroom, moments ago filled with the casual hum of sales chatter and polite laughter, had fallen uncomfortably still. Eyes darted between Angela's graceful exit and Michael's smug posture. His thin smile, plastered across his face, didn't hide the ugly undercurrent of what had just unfolded. It was then that the witnesses, those who had watched, who had heard, who had felt the sting of Michael's words even if they weren't directed at them, began to reckon with what they had seen. Near the corner, the young trainee who had earlier held the brochure was frozen in place. His name was Jason, and this was his second week on the job. He had been taught that customer service was everything, that professionalism mattered above all. Yet what he had witnessed was the opposite of everything he'd been told to uphold. His throat was dry, his palms clammy. He looked at Michael, then back at the door Angela had just walked through. His conscience stirred. Beside the receptionist desk, Olivia, the front desk associate, sat stiffly in her chair, her hands hovering above the keyboard without typing. She had seen enough in her years at the dealership to know when a manager had crossed the line. She had heard whispers before, quiet complaints that never reached the ears of upper management. But this time was different. This time there had been an audience. Even customers had noticed. A middle-aged man, neatly dressed in a navy blazer, turned to his wife with a frown. "That was out of line," he whispered. She nodded, her lips pressed tight, the discomfort in her eyes unmistakable. They were potential buyers, and now they weren't sure they wanted to buy from this place at all. But perhaps the most striking reaction came from an older woman standing near a luxury sedan. She had watched silently as the scene unfolded, her eyes sharp, her stance unwavering. When Angela had spoken up, the woman had nodded subtly, as though affirming the courage it took to confront Michael so directly. Now, as the silence thickened, she took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Michael," she said, her voice carrying with quiet authority. The sound cut through the room like a bell. Everyone turned. Michael's smirk faltered just slightly. The woman tilted her head, studying him with disappointment. That wasn't professionalism. That was prejudice, plain and simple. Michael stiffened, his pride bristling. "With all due respect, ma'am, I was only ensuring the standards of this dealership were upheld. We can't have just anyone behind the wheel of these cars. Liability issues, you understand." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Liability?" She gestured toward the showroom floor. "I've been in this dealership long enough to see who gets offered test drives without question. I've seen customers walk in wearing sweatpants and ball caps, and you practically throw them the keys. Don't talk to me about liability. We all know what this was." Her words rippled through the room. Jason swallowed hard. Olivia looked down at her desk, and even the couple browsing near the Porsche shifted uncomfortably. Michael's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected to be called out so openly, especially not in front of his staff and potential buyers. Still, he tried to recover. "With respect, ma'am, I believe you're misinterpreting the situation. My concern was—" "Don't," the woman interrupted, her voice sharper now. "Don't insult my intelligence with excuses. You embarrassed a woman who walked in here ready to do business. You belittled her, and we all saw it." The weight of her words hung in the air. For the first time, Michael's confidence faltered. His practiced smirk didn't return. Instead, he glanced around the showroom, searching for some sign of support. But he found only lowered gazes and uneasy silence. His authority was crumbling piece by piece. Jason finally cleared his throat, his voice shaky but sincere. She did say she was here to buy. I mean, she wasn't just looking. You could tell." His words were quiet, but in the hush of the showroom, they carried. Olivia added softly, "She deserved better than that." The couple near the Porsche exchanged a look. Then the husband spoke up. "Frankly, I don't think I want to buy a car here anymore. Not if this is how customers are treated." His wife nodded in agreement, her voice firm. "You lost more than one sale today." Michael's face reddened, his jaw clenched. He opened his mouth to defend himself again, but the tide was turning too quickly. The witnesses had spoken, and their voices carried truth heavier than any excuse he could muster. For Angela, the humiliation was still fresh as she stepped out into the sunlight beyond the showroom doors. But inside, the seeds of her vindication had already been planted. The people who had seen, who had remained silent at first, were now speaking. And their voices would echo far beyond this single afternoon. Because injustice rarely stays hidden when witnesses find the courage to speak. And soon, those voices would reach the ears of someone who could no longer ignore them. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she considered her next step. Should she send this directly to corporate headquarters? Should she share it publicly so others would see how customers were treated? She thought of the young trainee, Jason, his nervous eyes darting between Michael and herself. She thought of Olivia, quiet but clearly uncomfortable. And she thought of the older woman who had spoken up, her voice steady and unflinching. Angela decided this couldn't remain a private complaint. Too often, private complaints were buried. She had the means, the courage, and most importantly, the truth. She was going to use them all. Later that evening, after carefully editing her account, she posted the story online. She didn't use inflammatory words. She didn't hurl insults. She simply told the truth. How she had been humiliated in front of staff and customers. How she had been treated like she didn't belong. How a manager in a position of power had allowed his bias to guide his actions. Within hours, the story began to spread. First among her circle of friends and colleagues, many of whom were outraged but not surprised. Then among strangers, who shared it with comments like, "This is exactly what we deal with," and "Enough is enough." By morning, it had reached thousands. By the following afternoon, it had reached tens of thousands. Back at the dealership, Michael walked in to start his day as though nothing had happened. But the whispers started almost immediately. Olivia was scrolling on her phone when her eyes widened. Jason hurried in with his face pale, holding up his own phone to show the headline, "Luxury car showroom manager accused of humiliating black woman." Michael's name was in the first line. He snatched the phone from Jason's hand, his eyes scanning the article. His stomach dropped. It wasn't just a vague complaint. It was detailed, precise, and corroborated by descriptions of witnesses. The older woman's sharp words had been quoted, retold by others who had also shared the story. Customers had posted online too, saying they'd been there, that they saw what happened. For Michael, the breaking point had arrived. He stormed into his office, slamming the door. But anger wasn't going to make this go away. His reputation was unraveling in real time, and no amount of authority over his staff could stop it. Angela, meanwhile, sat at home watching the responses pour in. Messages of support flooded her inbox. Stories from others who had experienced the same kind of treatment. Voices rising in solidarity. She hadn't asked for it, but she had become a symbol, a spark for conversations that needed to be had. And as her story gained momentum, it reached the eyes of someone very important. The corporate leadership of the luxury car brand. To them, this wasn't just a story. It was a crisis. Michael didn't know it yet, but the breaking point he had created wasn't just his own downfall. It was the moment that would bring justice to the forefront. By the following morning, Angela's story was no longer just another social media post. It had grown into a wave. News outlets began picking it up, local reporters quoting her account word for word. The headline changed from whispers in comment sections to bold print on news sites. Black woman humiliated at luxury car showroom. Manager accused of discrimination. Angela woke up to dozens of missed calls and messages. Friends checked in, colleagues offered their support, and even strangers wrote to her, thanking her for having the courage to share her truth. She sipped her coffee slowly, watching as the notifications climbed higher, one after another. But across the city, in the polished glass showroom where it all began, Michael's world was unraveling. He walked into work stiff-jawed, trying to carry the same air of authority he always had. But something was different now, something he couldn't control. His staff barely made eye contact. Jason mumbled a quiet morning and disappeared into the back. Olivia gave him a quick nod, but her expression was cool, her usual warmth gone. Even the receptionist avoided his gaze. Then the phone started ringing. Customers, furious, demanding answers. Some said they had canceled their appointments. Others shouted at the staff, saying they would never buy from a brand that tolerated this kind of behavior. The receptionist, red-faced and overwhelmed, struggled to keep up with the calls. By mid-morning, corporate had called. Michael was summoned into a video meeting with regional executives. The faces on the screen were grave, their tone sharper than he had ever heard. Michael, one of them began, "We've received serious complaints regarding your conduct. This isn't just an internal issue anymore. It's all over the news. Do you realize the damage this has caused our brand?" Michael swallowed hard, scrambling for words. "It's being blown out of proportion. She came in looking out of place and But the executive cut him off. "Stop. We don't want excuses. We've already heard from customers who were there. They confirmed what happened. We've seen the posts, the videos. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a scandal." Michael tried again. "Look, I can fix this. I'll apologize. I'll reach out." The executives exchanged glances, their silence heavier than words. Finally, one leaned forward. "It's not about your apology anymore. It's about accountability. We are launching a formal investigation, effective immediately. Until further notice, you're suspended from your position." The word hit him like a slap. Suspended. Michael's chest tightened as he realized how quickly control was slipping through his fingers. Back at her apartment, Angela received a message she hadn't expected. It was from one of the staff members at the dealership, Olivia. The message was simple. "Thank you for speaking up. Many of us have wanted to, but we were afraid. You've given us strength." Angela closed her eyes for a moment, the words settling deep within her. This wasn't just about her humiliation anymore. It was about all the others who had been silenced, forced to endure quietly. And now, their voices were joining hers. That evening, Angela was invited to appear on a local news segment. Sitting across from the anchor, she spoke calmly, her voice steady. "This isn't just about one bad experience. It's about a pattern. Too many of us walk into spaces and are judged before we've even spoken. We're questioned, belittled, and made to feel like we don't belong. I told my story because silence only protects those who abuse their power. I want people to know we do belong." Her words resonated. Viewers at home nodded, some with tears in their eyes. Social media erupted again, her clip spreading faster than her original post. Meanwhile, Michael sat at home, watching the very same clip on his television. He clenched his fists, his pride warring with the undeniable reality. He had underestimated her. He had thought she would walk away, humiliated and silent. But instead, she had risen. And now he was the one cornered, powerless against the tide. The next morning, the dealership's doors were met with protesters. People holding signs, "Respect Black customers," "Accountability now," "No justice," "No business." Cars honked in support as they passed by, the chants echoing through the street. Inside, the staff whispered nervously, watching as Michael's career crumbled in real time. Jason muttered, "This is the reckoning." Under his breath, Olivia, standing beside him, nodded solemnly. And Angela? She drove past the dealership, slowing down to take it all in. She didn't stop. She didn't need to. The truth was moving forward on its own now, and there was no stopping it. Michael had thought power meant control. But real power, Angela realized, was truth, and truth had finally caught up with him. The days that followed marked the slow but inevitable collapse of everything Michael had built his life around. The dealership showroom, once a gleaming temple to wealth and success, had become a stage for his downfall. By Monday morning, the protest outside had doubled in size. Cameras from national news outlets lined the sidewalks, capturing every chant, every sign, every angry customer who turned away from the dealership doors. What had begun as a single story on Angela's social media had snowballed into a national conversation. The showroom sat eerily quiet inside, its luxury cars collecting dust under the blinding lights. Few customers dared to cross the picket line. The ones who did, mostly curious onlookers, whispered and took photos, not of the cars, but of the chaos. Michael tried to move about with his old air of authority, but the staff had changed. They no longer looked at him with even reluctant respect. Their glances were cold, clipped, full of something he had never seen before: contempt. Jason no longer smiled nervously in meetings. Olivia refused to laugh at his forced jokes. The receptionist wouldn't even look him in the eye. That morning, he was called again into a video meeting with corporate executives. The air was thicker this time, more final. "Michael," one executive began, his voice low and firm, "we've concluded our investigation." Michael leaned forward, desperate to regain some ground. "I can explain. I've been with this company for years. I've brought in millions. This is being blown out of proportion by the media. It's a witch hunt." But the executive shook his head. "It's not a witch hunt. It's accountability. We've reviewed multiple witness statements. We've seen the recordings from inside the showroom. There is no excuse for the way you treated Ms. Angela Harris." Michael's face flushed, his throat tightening. "So what? You're just gonna throw me away over one mistake?" "One moment." The executive's reply was cold. "It wasn't one mistake. It was a reflection of character. And that reflection has cost us dearly. We've lost clients. We've lost reputation. And now we've lost trust. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated." The word struck with finality. Terminated. Michael opened his mouth, but no words came. He stared at the screen as the executives logged off one by one, leaving him alone with his silence and the faint reflection of his own shocked face. Later that afternoon, as word spread of his firing, reporters swarmed the dealership. Some staff stepped outside to speak anonymously, confirming what had long been whispered: that Michael had a history of arrogance, of dismissing customers he thought didn't fit the image. The corporate statement released to the press was brief but brutal. "We do not tolerate discrimination or disrespect of any kind. The actions taken by our former showroom manager do not reflect our values. Effective immediately, he has been removed from his position." The headline flashed across every screen, every feed. Michael's name, once associated with high sales and luxury, was now tied to humiliation and disgrace. At home, he sat in darkness, phone buzzing endlessly with calls he refused to answer. Old colleagues, friends, even family sent messages, some sympathetic, most critical. His bank account was heavy with bills, his future uncertain. He had lived for the title, for the prestige, and now it was gone, ripped from him in front of the entire city. Meanwhile, Angela sat in her quiet living room, scrolling through her phone. The news of Michael's firing had broken, and her inbox flooded again, this time with messages of victory. Strangers thanked her for holding him accountable. Friends cheered her resilience. Even people she didn't know personally wrote to her, "Your story gave me courage." But Angela didn't smile triumphantly. She wasn't celebrating his downfall. What she felt was deeper, heavier. This wasn't just about one man losing his job. It was about a moment of truth, a mirror held up to society. That evening, she walked into her neighborhood cafe. For the first time since the incident, people greeted her warmly, with nods of respect. The barista slipped her coffee across the counter, whispering, "That was brave, what you did." Angela nodded softly. "Thank you." Across town, Michael sat in his luxury apartment, staring at the untouched dinner on his table. His thoughts churned: anger, denial, shame. He replayed the moment over and over in his mind, the smug tone in his own voice when he had dismissed her. He thought of her calm defiance, the way she had stood tall in the face of his cruelty. He remembered, with a sick twist in his stomach, the look in her eyes. Not broken, not defeated, but unshakable. That look haunted him. The man who had once prided himself on control now had none. The fall was complete, and the silence of his apartment only deepened the weight of what he had lost. And Angela? She carried herself with dignity, not as a victor in someone else's downfall, but as a woman who had refused to be erased. The balance had shifted. Justice had been served, not in a courtroom, not in whispers, but in the full light of day. Michael had fallen, and the city had witnessed it. But Angela's strength, that was what endured. The city eventually moved on. New headlines came and went. Fresh scandals replaced old ones. and the constant hum of daily life swallowed yesterday's outrage. But for those who had witnessed the story of Angela Harris and the fallen manager of the luxury showroom, something lingered. For Angela herself, life found its rhythm again. She returned to her career, her community work, and her quiet evenings at home. Yet she carried something new with her now, a sense of responsibility. She knew her story had touched people far beyond the walls of that showroom. It had become a reminder of something both simple and profound. Dignity cannot be stripped away, no matter how harsh the attempt. One evening, weeks after the ordeal had ended, Angela walked along the riverside promenade in downtown Chicago. The golden glow of the setting sun reflected off the water, the city's skyline rising like a crown behind it. She sat on a bench, sipping her coffee, and thought about everything that had unfolded. Her phone buzzed with yet another message. It was from a young woman she had never met, a college student in Atlanta who had seen Angela's story online. "I wanted to thank you," the message read. "I was treated badly at a store last week, and for the first time I spoke up. I remembered you. I remembered how you stood your ground. I realized my voice matters too." Angela read the words twice, her chest tightening with emotion. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds of the city wash over her. The laughter of children, the honking of distant traffic, the rhythm of footsteps on the pavement. She hadn't asked to become a symbol, yet here she was, her story inspiring others to reclaim their worth. That, she realized, was the true victory. Meanwhile, Michael's name faded from the spotlight. He was no longer a trending headline, no longer the man in the suit who commanded a showroom. He had become just another cautionary tale, whispered about in conversations and used as an example of arrogance brought low. In time, even those whispers would fade, leaving him alone with his regrets. But Angela's story endured. It endured in the way people looked at her with quiet admiration when she walked through her neighborhood. It endured in the way her colleagues at work spoke of her courage in moments of difficulty. It endured in the lives of strangers who drew strength from her stand. Angela often thought back to that single moment in the showroom, the manager's dismissive words, the sharp sting of humiliation. She realized now that the moment was never really about him. It was about what she chose to do with it. She could have left quietly. She could have buried the anger and the shame. But instead, she had refused to be silenced. And because she chose to stand tall, others found the courage to do the same. On that riverside bench, watching the lights of the city flicker to life as dusk fell, Angela whispered softly to herself, "Respect is not a gift. It's a right." Her voice was quiet, but it carried inside her with the weight of truth. This was more than a story about a woman and a showroom. It was about the endless resilience of people who are too often underestimated, dismissed, or silenced. It was about the strength it takes to walk into hostile spaces and hold your head high. It was about survival, not just of the body but of dignity, of spirit, of identity. Angela stood from the bench, straightened her shoulders, and walked into the evening crowd. She blended with the city, with its noise and its lights, but she walked with something unshakable. Not anger, not bitterness, strength. The kind of strength that can't be fired, humiliated, or erased. And though the headlines would eventually vanish, and though the world would spin on to its next story, Angela knew that hers had left an imprint. Not because it was loud, but because it was true. And truth, once spoken, never truly disappears.